joining in the 8th episode of Step Up with Natasha. A very warm welcome to all of you. And today I have someone who is, I can say, a sort of psychedelic drugs expert, if I may say so. He's a writer, he's a TED speaker multiple times, he is a content creator, and he's a psychologist. Let me present to you Mr. Simeon Keremedchiev. I hope that I pronounced it right, right?
You actually did a brilliant work there. People
Right?
usually mess it up, but you did a lovely work there. And thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for the invitation to be on your podcast. It's my pleasure, and I hope that we'll. I am confident that we'll be able to produce a lovely conversation for your fantastic audience. And yeah, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
I'm sure, and I know that you have a lot of things to juggle right now, but still, I mean, you taking out time for this and sitting with me on this conversation, it really means a lot. So thank you so much. Thank you, really.
No, it's important for me to respond to people like yourself, fellow content creators, people who have interest in psychedelics. I've taken it on as a mission to sort of guide people, help them, find their bearings in the psychedelic world, and
Yeah,
just spread the word
yeah.
about psychedelics in
I
general.
guess. Yeah. So in fact, when I was researching about the topic and I was going through all the TED talks on YouTube, and then I came across your video and I saw that you have actually spoken about it on TED talks like multiple times, and I was like, this guy has all the information. He better know everything. And then that's how I sent out the invite to you, and it was very kind of you to actually accept it and right now be in this conversation with me. So,
Yeah.
Simeon, no, let's actually. I know that most of the people are aware about psychedelics, but still, for me, I think even if someone is watching it for the first time, which is a rarity, but even if someone is coming across this term for the first time, so let's just break it down and then dive into the broader realm. So, what does psychedelic exactly mean?
Psychedelic as a word, it means mind expanding or mind opening. Psych means mind or soul. It's in Latin, and delum means to show, to reveal, to make apparent, to make visible. So in combination, the two words single about a change in perception, a change in your mind of some sort. In modern language and in street language, psychedelics, not just street language, that's how they're referred to. Psychedelics, a group of compounds, psychoactive compounds that have been found to have profound effects on the human, and not just the human psychology, other mammals as well. These effects have been known for millennia. They've been used by humans for a very long time, and only recently, only in the last, I'd say, 100 or so years, they've become popular. In the Western world, they've come out of the jungle thanks to some pioneers in the field. They've come out of the jungle and they entered society at a larger scale, maybe 100, 150 years ago. They were available before that, but not as
No,
famous
that's
as they
true.
are today,
Yeah.
obviously. There's different kinds of psychedelic substances out there. They are all, come under the umbrella of psychedelics, but they could have different origin. Some of them could be semi-synthetic. They could be natural. In the case of magic mushrooms or the mescaline cacti, they've got different origins, different compounds, but all under the umbrella of psychedelics, due to the reason that they give you a life-changing experience that starts with changing your mind.
So, moving to the next question, like you said, that these are mind expanding, drugs.
Yeah.
So, if you can list out that what are these drugs that we call psychedelic and how they are different from other sort of drugs?
All right. So the most common psychedelics that are usually used, most widely, are LSD, magic mushrooms, mescaline cacti, DMT has been picking up in popularity greatly. DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, which is a very ancient brew that comes from South America. And there's something called ayahuasca tourism now, that people just go to South America just for the sake of experiencing what ayahuasca has to offer. So these are, I think, the psychedelic. There's many others as well, but these are the ones that people most commonly use. In my opinion, I might be wrong. They are qualitatively different to everything else out there in terms of experience, a personal experience, in terms of effects as well, in terms of an afterglow. Psychedelics, that's one of the best things about them, and one of the most desirable features of these compounds in terms of therapy is that they have sort of long-term effects. They could have long-term effects on your perceptions, on your perspectives of certain things. So once the psychedelic experience is over and you're back to normal, you'd still have some of the ideas that you came up with, some of the newfound truths about yourself, about the world, let's say, that you will still be able to carry those with yourself after the experience is over. It's very different to say marijuana. It's very different to cocaine. It does share some characteristics with marijuana, but it's a completely different level of experience. So it's very difficult to compare it to other forms of substances that people usually like to use. It's something very different, and people should be aware of that. I wasn't. When I first found out about psychedelics, I thought that I'm just going to have, um, just another funny experience with friends, had some laughs, Friday evening and stuff. And I was very wrong. I was very wrong, and people still make the mistake of thinking that a psychedelic will have anything to do with, let's say, marijuana or maybe cocaine, even ecstasy. It is different. It is very different in terms of what you go through.
So basically, what I've understood is that this is not, and this is what even I've heard, that this is not for recreational purposes. That's what majority of people think.
At least that's the message I'm trying to get across to people. That's what that's my point. There's many things out there that we can use recreationally. I'm not saying that psychedelics can't be used. I just think my personal belief is that they shouldn't be used just to have fun, because they're too powerful, they've got too big of a history. But they are, too powerful in what they can do to you. And that's why I don't think that it's completely reasonable to use them, let's say, as people would use marijuana, maybe. I think they should be approached differently.
Yeah, and in fact, when I was looking up for the content, and I got to know that there's basically a whole process to it, in the sense that I think when you're taking any other drug, like we discussed, that this is not for recreational purpose. There has to be a setting and a mindset that involves
Yeah,
before you get into it. Like this is not like an ordinary, let's have some fun kind of
let's have
trip.
some fun. Yeah,
Yeah, there's
yeah.
a lot of mental preparation that goes into it. Why don't you share that? That what exactly, what is the step-by-step process of it?
Right, right. Thank you so much for bringing this up, because this is a very important aspect of doing psychedelics at all, and set and setting are the two fundamental things that you need to consider before you jump into the trip. Set refers to yourself, your personal perceptions, your
Hmm.
personal attitudes at the moment. Are you healthy? How do you feel in your life? How do you feel in your day? Did you have a good day today? Did you have a good week? Are you in a good mindset and mood set? So that's really important. Setting it has more to do with the external environment. The external environment when doing psychedelics should ideally be very safe. It should be an area or a place that you're at least familiar with if you're going to dive deeper into the psychedelic realm, especially. You need to be familiar with that place. It's good. Now, very many people still forego considering the set and setting aspect. They would do psychedelics anywhere with anyone, and that's the choice they make. But in my experience, and having gone through a trip when I didn't consider certain setting, I can tell people that they should definitely consider certain setting.
What
um,
was your experience like when you didn't know about the setting? What was your experience like?
that was actually my first time I did psychedelics. Like I said, I was really unprepared. I did it with a person that I didn't know well. He didn't know me well, and that was that was a really slippery bit in the trip that we didn't knew each other well. Um, it was some 6 7 years ago now. The We were in a very dirty environment. It was a dirty student flat in Cardiff, Wales. We were still students. It was We were very unprepared. So things got scary. That's what happens when you don't prepare for a trip. Things get scary very quickly, and if you are not, prepared for it, you're gonna get overwhelmed because psychedelics, they overwhelm you either way. Whether
Okay.
you're prepared or not, they're still going to overwhelm you. And we were unprepared, we got scared, and maybe 2 hours into the trip, he had to leave. I begged him to leave, and he finally agreed, and he saw what I meant because we connected on a mental level, and we could hear each other's thoughts, and they weren't good thoughts. We were scared about ourselves, about, you know, and that's potentially, the outcome you could expect. It was still a fantastic trip. It was a very difficult, I could say, a bad trip. It was a bad trip, definitely. But when I came out, it was a whole new world to me. The world had changed to me. I had new eyes to see through. And that's when my journey really in life, I could say, really started. That's when I decided to follow my passions, to do my best to spread the word about psychedelics, because they gave me so much understanding, so much new visions about what I could do with myself, with my life, with my family, etc. So a bad trip isn't always a bad trip. It's just very, a, a very,
Overwhelming.
yeah, yeah. It's much better. It's much
Yeah.
better to consider certain setting and do it properly.
Okay. So, like you shared your experience that suddenly your thoughts become like there's because when I was looking up for it, you in one of your talks you said that it's like each and every part of your brain starts communicating with each and every other part of your brain, right?
Yeah,
And even I have come across things where people said that suddenly the colors and the sounds become so bright and it's so sharp.
yeah,
People happen to see beings that they haven't ever, the forms and beings that they have never ever come across. They the most interesting part was when people said that the destruction of self ego and the
yeah,
interconnectedness with everything around them,
yeah,
and how and that is also how I guess somewhere responsible in I don't know, dealing with depression. So I
yeah.
want to understand that what exactly is the science of it? Like, I mean, these are beautiful experiences, but what exactly goes in your brain when you take psychedelic drug like that? What exactly happens here that it suddenly, it's the world open to you?
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the things about psychedelics. I could tell you in words what
Yeah,
happens,
yeah.
but that wouldn't do any justice to the actual experience. You raised the question beautifully, though. Thank you so much for that. First of all, psychedelics, like I say in my first TEDx lecture on the subject, psychedelics affect the areas of the brain that are normally responsible for processing all thoughts and signals related to your perception of self.
Okay.
Okay, so somewhere in your brain, there's a couple, not a couple, but a few areas that constantly exchange signals. They are kind of like hubs connected to other areas of the brain that are responsible for memory, motor action, sensory perceptions, etc. So when you take psychedelics, the area that is responsible for your sense of personality, of your ego, um, is kind of put on a standby mode. The blood flow is reduced to that area, and the neuronal activity is consequently decreased. So when that happens, all, not all, but most other brain areas that do not normally cooperate between themselves, and they don't, send signals
Interact,
between
yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
they connect. They usually they suddenly connect, and it's a very astonishing experience to feel your brain when it's working um, in this way. It's something that you experience maybe when you dream more vividly, but it's very intense. You realize how much potential there is within your skull. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's crazy, and that's when you start to trip because when you realize what exactly you have in your mind, you start exploring. You start overthinking things that you've kind of been stuck with. You look at stereotypes and perceptions again. So yeah, that's when it gets really crazy. Once you start to switch off the ego in the brain. How does that feel in terms of thoughts that you have? Varies from person to person and from those to those. It's going to be different for you. It's going to be different for me. Um, the one thing that I've seen in my experience that people share in terms of what they go through is their death, their mental
Yes,
death.
yes, yes,
When you
exactly.
switch off, yeah, when you switch off the brain area responsible for the ego, you start your brain, your subconscious mind starts showing you thoughts and interlinks them and makes them very convincing. And those thoughts either tell you that you are about to die, just any moment now, you're going to drop dead, and that's going to be you. Okay. Or in my case, I sometimes either feel that when I experience an ego death, or feel that I will go completely nuts. I will be a vegetable to to
Yeah,
the end of my life, and that's
yeah.
how I'm going to function. And in a trip, that's something that people don't usually touch upon. In a trip, especially if you take a higher dose, you could experience multiple of those. Multiple times you could see a story in your mind or a movie, like some people call it, in your mind that leads to your imminent death or imminent insanity. And that's a very challenging thought to go through and to accept and to be all right with while
Right.
you are under the influence. So it's very important to consider how much exactly you're going to take, because these experiences are not usually associated with lower doses. There are people who will experience ego death on a very low dose, but they usually come about at larger doses, heroic doses as they call them, 4 to 5 grams and above.
Okay. So, even when I was, so I have heard it from multiple people that suddenly, it's like a trip into the universe, and it's altogether a very different and surreal world. And this has been reported by a lot of people, right? So, like you said, that there's a part of area in the brain where suddenly that stops functioning when it comes to self. But
Yeah.
how does it reflect in suddenly vividly seeing everything else? I mean, I'm not thinking about myself, that part I get it, but then I everything else becomes so emphasized, and
Yeah.
I'm able to see even in darkness, because I've heard
Yeah.
that a lot of these stuff is taken, in pitch black dark. So how in that setting I'm able to see and perceive and hear, like all my other senses gets too much of activated, if I'm right. Is that so?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. First of all, one of the things is that you mentioned it in your previous question. Um, the senses get overlapped and get exchanged somehow. You can hear a color, you can smell a sound, you can
Wow.
do yeah, you can do different things like that, and you start seeing stuff because your senses, in my opinion, in my experience, I feel my senses are unleashed, and they are accepting information from the environment without as many filters as we usually have. In terms of seeing stuff,
Yeah.
okay, well, science, that's the thing about psychedelics. There's been lots of science on it so far, but there's still so much that we don't know. What we do know is that it does affect the visual cortex and the visual parts of the brain that are responsible for seeing. So when those combine with some other areas and some other neurons in your brain, you start to see very wild things. It's very difficult to pinpoint exactly what is happening, within the brain. We're still researching that. You know, science is still struggling to realize why you are experiencing what you're experiencing when you take a psychedelic. It's still a very big mystery. How does it work? You know,
Yeah.
what people and experienced users and maybe some scientists like to entertain as a thought is that once the ego is silenced, once the persona within your brain is silenced, um, you start to receive more information from your subconscious mind, and that's an experience that I could vouch for. I do believe that once you switch off the ego, you begin to delve into your subconscious mind, and as we know, the subconscious makes up to 90% of what we are, of who we are. So we start to see the intricacies of who we are, of what we are made of as a person and as a personality. And that's when you start getting all the wild visions. Your subconscious mind sends you all the wild visions. It's comparable, again, it's comparable to your night sleep when your personality is asleep, but your mind still produces things. Your subconscious mind still gives you an experience. Okay,
Right.
so a similar thing is biologically kind of similar, and in terms of perceptional, differences, they are very similar. Dreams to the psychedelic world, similar, but definitely not the same.
Okay, so if I have interpreted it rightly, this basically means that it crumbles down to the very structured world that we have built upon over the years.
Yeah,
If I'm not wrong, this is basically that part of the brain which processes information in terms of that it puts logic into it and the way we perceive the world, that somehow gets distorted because we take out that logic that is according to us, of course, and
yes,
that's how we are able to get references from every other part of the brain, and that's how we can look at the bigger picture that okay, that's how it is all
yeah,
connected. Is that so?
yeah.
So if
That's
I may,
that's pretty much it.
so if I may also ask, because is it very much like a child's brain? Because the structure we have developed as we aged. So
Yeah.
is it also very similar to the way we used to think in our childhood?
To a certain degree, yes. To a certain degree, yes. Because, like I said again in my TEDx talk, which I invite your viewers to see as well. Um, a child's brain constantly makes up new paths. A child explores the world, tries this, tries that, falls here, falls there. So new paths are being explored. They're not
Right.
necessarily attained and made and put down in place, but they're being explored. Um, signals go in every direction. That's why children are a bit peculiar. Um, and it is a very similar experience on mushrooms. Now, I I I'm not in a position to say that it's yes exactly the same thing. I don't think it is biologically. I don't think it's they are that much comparable, but pretty much the same. What should I say? The same order and the same method
Right.
produces a similar experience because people under the effects of psychedelics, they've reported they felt childlike, very childish. It's very giggly. Could be very giggly. Um, so in terms of yeah, feelings that you're going to have during the trip, it is very comparable to a child's experience, to a children's experience, but biologically they do have different origin. The experience has a different origin when you're a child and when you are doing a psychedelic. They are somewhat comparable in terms of constructing new paths and opening up new signal ways in your brain.
And that is the reason that it actually takes away the fear of death also, like you said, because you
I
look at
don't
it very
know.
objectively. Is that
I
so?
don't know the fear of death about me. Because the fear of death thing that you could get from the psychedelic experience. People usually overcome their fear, the fear of death that they have, due to the fact that they see reality in a completely new way. That's the thing. You see the world with a completely new eyes, and you realize somehow within yourself, you realize that death isn't the end. It just can't be the end. So I wouldn't say, losing your fear of death is somewhat linked to feeling childlike during the experience, but it is a side effect that people have, reported.
So yeah, this is a very important question for me. How how different is it from the meditative state of mind? Like even I asked you in the mail that uh, because I'm sure, because I came across that this has been actually shared with a lot of spiritual gurus as well. So how different is it from your meditative state of mind in this sort of consciousness, which is again mind expanding and mind revealing information? Yeah.
Yeah. Doing the work substance free is a much more difficult path, but to me, it is the correct path. It is the only long-term path.
Okay, so because I came across this video and it said that people who already are in that state of mind, because it apparently takes you to that level of consciousness which we are not able to access in our daily lives. And I don't know if it was Ram Das or who, but it was shared with someone, a spiritual guru. And when he had it, he said, and he was as normal as he was before. He was like, "So what happened?" So because he's
That's
already
Sadhguru.
is that Sadhguru? I thought that
Sadhguru, I've seen that video,
okay.
yeah.
So he was like, no, nothing happened to it because he's
Yeah,
already in that altered state of consciousness all the time. So
yeah.
I mean, that's what actually piqued my interest and it excited me. That okay, here
Fantastic.
is that here is we people. I mean, there are certain people who invest so much of time. You don't get meditation right in a jiffy. I mean, it takes years of
Yeah,
practice, and that's what these psychedelic drugs are able to do. Like they actually reveal that sort of dimension to you, like
dimension.
this,
Yeah,
like this.
yeah. That's one of the best things about psychedelics, in my opinion. I'm gonna answer you in this way, okay? When I first took psychedelics,
Hmm.
30 minutes in, I actually recorded this on video that I'm not going to share with you, but because it's a ridiculous video
Okay.
from way back. But 30 minutes into the trip, I I was like, oh, so this is what all the gurus in the Himalayas are doing. This is what all the yogis are on about. And immediately after that came the realization that I could attain this level of consciousness without taking any mushrooms or any LSD or anything. So that was a very priceless realization that I had on my first go. And exactly as Sadhguru says it, after my first very, very deep trips, I decided to give myself a year where I would do meditation and yoga twice a day, every day. I wouldn't drink alcohol. I wouldn't drink, anything bad. I would only eat clean food for a year to see what happens. In the middle of this year, as I was going in my clean life and clean body, I decided to trip with some friends, and when they started tripping really, really hard, I was still at baseline and nothing happened to me. That was very funny. My thoughts just became a little more colorful, things
Yeah.
became a little more vibrant. But in terms of perceptions and in terms of tripping at all, I couldn't trip. And
Whoa.
yeah, and I was really proud of myself. I remember sitting back in the armchair and going like, I've done it. I definitely don't need mushrooms or any external substance to get to that place. And the
Okay.
thing with now, there's a very big argument on that, whether you can go deeper with the substance or without one.
Hmm.
And I've been to there's many people who have eaten much more mushrooms than me, but the maximum I've taken is 12 or 13 dried grams, and that
Okay.
takes you to a very far away place indeed. That's a completely different universe,
Hmm.
many different universes that you go through, but it's very chaotic. It's
Hmm.
very it's very wild. It's like a roller coaster.
Okay. So is that the reason that initially when the whole scientific research on psychedelic was getting started and suddenly, one fine day, everything was shut down. Is it because of the same reason that, it got out in the public and people didn't know that how much to take, and suddenly, it was just termed as a wild drug, right? And that's how it got shut down. Is that the reason?
I, I, I don't think anyone alive knows the exact reasons and the exact history that played out.
Yeah.
You're referring back to the 60s and
Yes,
70s,
yes, yes,
aren't you? Because
yes.
yeah, okay. Because the stream broke,
Uh,
and I think people lacked information back then. Definitely, they definitely lacked information then because the science was pretty much at the start. There wasn't any internet,
hmm,
so people weren't as familiar and as able to reach the right information and
right.
correct information. And it was after the two world wars. It was after periods of unrest, and it was right in the flourishing of capitalism. So society was kind of very much broken into, the new world capitalists and
Hmm,
people who were living the American dream in the Western world and building all that, and all the others who kind of felt like a little out of place without, like it's still this way to this day. That's when Albert Hoffman produced LSD. That's when McKenna and his fellows started bringing more mushrooms into the
hmm,
US,
hmm,
and those ingredients were the correct and the right and the perfect ingredients to put into the soup of society, the society had become. So all of a sudden, one bit of society was very determined in their materialistic desires and aspirations, and on the other hand, we have all the people psychedelics,
hmm.
and
Right.
psychedelics provide a fantastic alternative view, not
Yeah.
alternative reality, but
Right.
alternative view to what reality could be. And that's there was very little regulation back then. It was actually regulated. LSD was regulated as a drug that they sold in pharmacies and stuff. It's easy to see that people didn't know exactly how to use it properly. I'm not judging them or the way they did it. I just think that it's not the appropriate way to install psychedelics into
Hmm,
society.
hmm,
They do have their place, undoubtedly, but the way they did it in the 60s and the 70s, the huge wave that started, it was a bit overboard, and the countries and the governments definitely had something to do about it, and they did, and they criminalized it. But this first wave of psychedelic movement that started in the 60s and 70s is the reason we are able to sit here today
and
and have this
discuss that.
conversation
Yeah.
without being locked up or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Those
Right.
people who tripped their brains out back in the 60s and 70s
Yeah.
laid down the foundation of what we're going to study and pick up from today. And yeah, well, it was as if a child picked up a new toy, yeah,
Hmm,
back in the 60s and 70s, and wanted to do everything with that toy
yeah.
and thought the toy was their world, and etc. We overdid it a little bit, overdid it, and I think one of the negative sides of the 60s and 70s was that psychedelics were turned into a political tool. You know, the pioneers of the movement, they started organizing people, and the government doesn't want that. No government wants that. Some random hippie to start organizing people to fight the system and stuff. They had to do something about it. But it did turn into a political tool, and I hope that we'll get out of this stuck position of political unfairness in terms of regulating and or not regulating psychedelics, and we're going to move psychedelics into the area of therapy and guided personal development. In my opinion, that's the best things we could do with those compounds.
Right. So tell us something about it, how it can help people in depression. Because I've heard that it can help in addiction, it can help in depression. So how psychedelic drugs are able to do that?
Last few years, there's been lots and lots of research, clinical trials being done in Europe and in the US as well, and in
Yeah.
Canada, I believe. The results in most of those, in all of them, actually are very, very impressive in terms of what psychedelics, and I think they're testing mostly with magic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. The results are extremely positive. Now, I don't want to oblige your audience with concrete themselves. I haven't checked the latest numbers on that, but it was a very good percentage of people who feel immense relief right after taking a psychedelic session for their depression. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my tongue, but a very good percentage of people continue to report improved well-being, improved mental state for weeks and months on end after a psychedelic experience. Now, I think in the US, they're very close to coming up with a approved FDA approved drug, um, psilocybin based, and I think this is going to come out in the public spectrum in the next year or so. A bunch of states already magic mushrooms, even for recreational purposes. So we're definitely headed in the direction of adopting psychedelics within the spectrum of therapy.
Wow.
I have had experience, and I actually did a whole TEDx talk on how psychedelics affected me while I was depressed, and it was definitely a breakthrough moment in my depression that marked the beginning of my recovery. So for me, it wasn't a one-off cure, but it was a very, very important part of my recovery, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing in the way that it helps you look at your thoughts, uh, you know, mm, delve deeper into what really bothers you, magnify on the things that you need to work on, and it kind of helps you see this to come out of the depression. Now, from my experience, it wasn't a one-off cure, but for some people, statistically, it is. From the results that they've been publishing in the last few years. I would, however, very much advise anyone with mental problems, depression, or something else, to speak to at least one or two therapists and people who have some degree of knowledge about psychedelic compounds and the research on it before they give you the yes to go home and do a trip or come into my office and let's do it together. Um, it's very important to really cure your depression by yourself, attempt to cure your depression by yourself. Just be very careful with that, because science is very um, is still coming up with answers. That's what I'm saying. We don't have a final answer and a final decision as to whether psychedelics are 100% safe to take when depressed. So it's still very important to approach them carefully, especially when one goes through mental torment.
Okay. So, but can anyone get addicted to it? Can addicted to the whole experience and having it again and again and again?
Statistically and scientifically, I don't think there's any evidence of that. And personally, subjectively, I don't think so, no. One can get to like going into that state of mind. And this could a trip more often than others. But I don't think you can get addicted to psychedelics in the same way you can get addicted to cocaine, to tobacco, to alcohol, to heroin. That's a completely different category of substances. I don't think so. I think addiction is the least you need to worry about when taking a psychedelic.
In
Yeah.
fact, because it is so overwhelming, it takes so much from you. I don't think so anyone can get addicted to it. I mean, you
Uh,
already need it proper.
Same thing.
Like,
Same thing.
yeah.
Same thing. But I must say that I've got acquaintances. I wouldn't call them friends because they're not as close to me. But I do know of many people who discovered psychedelics and decided to keep
Do
going
keep
and
going.
keep going. and keep tripping and keep dropping acid and keep eating mushrooms every week and keep experimenting, mixing substances. Because that's one of the things that people don't usually mention about psychedelics, and it's not a universal rule, but I've seen it in people and I've seen it in myself. Once after a trip, maybe
Mm.
you could feel an ego inflation. So you go through the trip, your ego is about to die, but you don't actually
Mm.
experience ego death, and you come on the other end, the trip ends, and you feel so confident that you came through on the other end, that you overcame this difficult trip, that you're like, oh my god, I can try anything now, like I've been to the most difficult part of it. And people start experimenting with mixing substances, and I know of occasions when that has brought about very tragic ends for people. Yeah, that's a concern that people need to mention when they talk about psychedelics.
So basically, really needs to do this under the supervision of someone, maybe like a medical expert or maybe this shamans. But this shouldn't be taken purely as a recreational purpose and something to experiment with by yourself. I mean, if you
It,
do
it
not
very
have that
much
sort of right.
Yeah, well, it depends. It very much depends on every person and on the aims of the, undertaking of the trip. If you are mentally troubled and you do it as therapy, definitely have someone with you there, maybe in the next room, maybe on a different floor, maybe a couple of blocks away from you even. Just have someone that you can call up
Cool.
if
Yeah.
things get really scary, or having someone to give you water when you need water in the middle of the trip is a very big difference that a person can make while you're tripping. It's advisable to prepare well,
Yeah.
and to make sure that you are safe, and
Mm.
that there's many considerations that you can go through and take, but it's always a good idea to have a trip sitter in the next room, sitting there with you. It depends on the kind of friends you are, but it's definitely a good advice to have someone there. I wouldn't say that it's 100% necessary that person is an expert, medical expert
Mm.
of any sort, but it's a good call to have someone.
And does anyone have a batch trip? Batch trip in the sense because you are open to seeing anything and everything. So has it happened that people have seen something really horrifying and something that they're not prepared to see?
Like I said, the psychedelic compounds, they open the floodgates to your subconscious mind, and unfortunately, we live in a world where people's subconscious minds are
Mm.
filled with very, very scary stuff and very bad things. And there are people who have hidden emotions, hidden traumas that they carry within themselves. And when they enter the trip, those things can show up in different forms, in different visual forms, in different sensations. And that can get really, really scary. It can be the scariest thing that has ever happened to you. Like I said, my very first go was a bad trip. That was a bad trip. It was really scary. I didn't know. I hadn't prepared. I didn't know what to expect, and I was all of a sudden dying within my mind 40 minutes after I had taken those shrooms, and it was scary. I thought, I didn't know what year it was. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know if the house I was tripping in was my house. Did I live there? It was really scary. I thought the house was set on fire. I thought the police was coming to get me. I thought my parents were gonna fly across the world and come to my student place and just take me to the mental facility or something like that. It was very scary. It was very scary, and that's why you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself to give you 100% chance to acknowledge all the things, to consider all the things that you could consider before tripping, and give yourself the best chance to minimize the effects of a bad trip if it shows up. No one is insured against a bad trip. No one is insured. I don't think so. It can happen to anyone. It
Yeah.
doesn't. It doesn't really vary with experience. Like I know of people and of myself that it is possible to have a bad experience. A more challenging experience, a more negative, dark, scary experience,
Right.
even after years of tripping. So you need to acknowledge set and setting every time.
Okay. So, but like you said that, it really helps in depression. So help me understand over here that if someone is in depression, of course, someone is not in the right state of mind, and not in the right state of mind in the sense that they already have thoughts which are not very flattering.
Yeah.
And in that case, I mean, don't you think it's contradictory because I'm not having the best of thoughts, but still I should go for it because this is gonna help me. But then that can also give me a bad trip. I mean, this is little complex to understand.
That's the greatest paradox for me as well. Thank you so much for bringing it up.
Uh,
That's what kept me from taking and trying psychedelics when I was depressed. It kept me, this thought, this very idea, kept me from trying it for 7 or 8 months. So I bore my depression for that long, and I was just too afraid to, because I knew my set wasn't right. I was
right.
just too afraid. But at some point, the depression got scarier than those thoughts of what could potentially go wrong if I took mushrooms. So, um, my advice would be for people to, again, talk to their therapist, be completely open and honest with their therapist. If your therapist doesn't understand you, then change it, find another one,
Yeah,
find, yeah, just
true.
find someone who is familiar with what you are asking them, because many therapists are still not familiar with psychedelics at all.
Right,
So, yeah, and then be extremely careful. Be extremely careful. Now, I would advise, if especially if it's your first try, if especially if you hadn't tripped before, getting the depression, start small. Start very safe. Start small and pick it up from there. Maybe now I can't advise how many grams magic mushrooms or how many drops of acid people to take. But start small. Measure your kilograms, weigh your mushrooms. In respect to your kilograms, speak to a bunch more people, and make sure that you're acting safe, because it's a very tricky subject. This point that you brought up is very adequate. In my experience, what happened was that the thoughts that kept looping and repeating themselves in my mind while I was depressed, the negative ones,
right.
they became unbearable when I took the mushrooms. Then they became completely unbearable. They filled my entire headspace. They filled the entire room, my entire being. And that's the key. That's the key. You need to, when they become so unbearable, you can no longer bear them. So
Well
you
done.
leave them aside.
Ah,
Oh, so okay, so this has kept me depressed. I can do this and this and this to overcome it. And then you look at the other one. It's become huge. It's taking up your entire space. It's very scary, but you look at it objectively and you say, you're very scary, but I can do this and that, and I'll resolve you too. And that's the cure. That was the cure for me. I don't want to generalize. I wouldn't want anyone to take my words as the general, complete, overarching truth,
right.
because this is pretty much subjective experience that I'm talking about here.
Okay. So, like you said that start small and all. Is there? I mean, if someone is going to try for the first time, so is there any one in particular, like we say, the beginner's drug, or then you move to the intermediate, and then you move to the advanced level. So, if someone asks you that, out of all these, because there are many, which one should one pick and to start with?
Which psychedelic?
Yeah, with
Or
psychedelic drug. Yeah, with psychedelic drug should one
uh,
pick and start with?
that's very subjective.
Yeah.
That's very subjective. For me, mushrooms are the best thing that you can start with.
Okay.
Some people start straight with ayahuasca. They head off to Peru. They have a bunch of ceremonies and they do it that way. Many others, I think, most people. But that again, it's very very difficult to say most people, because there's no concrete statistics on that.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
the first psychedelic people take in their lives? But in my impression, I think people usually start with LSD because it's more available somehow.
Okay.
It's kind of easier to come about most of the time. That's my experience, and related to the geographical place that I live in. Okay.
Okay.
But to me, magic mushrooms are the better starting compound. This will vary from person to person again, because they come preloaded with sort of like a script. That's my experience of them. They kind of like have a story to tell you about humans and
Yeah.
about Earth and about
Yeah.
space and about things,
Right.
and just as they're running you through this roller coaster of knowledge, it ends, and you're suddenly, oh my god, you know,
Ah, ah,
the experience, ends. You still have the overglow, but the end of the trip is just, could be as sudden as they come up.
okay.
So yeah, that's that. And LSD, on the other hand, it's a lot more chaotic, at least to me. And people usually make the comparison between LSD and magic mushrooms. LSD is that you're given a rocket, a space rocket, and you're at the driver's seat. And with mushrooms, it's kind of you attached to the rocket, you're tied to the rocket, and it takes you everywhere it's going to take you. That's a
Okay.
kind of like a good comparison and a good metaphor,
Okay.
but it doesn't describe everything in its entirety. Um, I would advise people to go for mushrooms. I like mushrooms better. I do.
Okay. So I guess even in
Uh,
terms of the duration of the high, that also differs. I guess DMT is like 15 minutes and rest of them
yeah,
last longer, right? Something like that.
yeah. I wouldn't advise people to jump on DMT straight away. It could be very confusing for them.
Okay.
LSD, that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. Many people can't put aside 10, 12, 15 hours to trip on acid. My first trip on acid lasted about 10 to 12 hours, and it was a hell of a long ride, man. I just wanted it to end at the end. With
Uh,
mushrooms, you can do it in 4 to 6 hours. You won't be able to go to meetings and do work after
yeah.
that,
It's
but
more of like a
it's not
Sunday
like.
thing, I'm free on the weekend. Let's catch up and let's do some mushrooms and we'll talk then.
Definitely, I think mushrooms are much more friendly in that sort of
Okay.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in the end, what is the final word? Like, what is the conclusion according to you? Like, how would you
Conclusion of
what
what, sorry?
like that how much it is does need to be taken, and how good is it or how bad is it, or the government should again think to at least consider to legalize it in those terms.
Right, right. How good and how bad it is, that depends or that varies from person to person. Water is the best thing we have. Like without water, we're gonna die. But if we abuse water, we're gonna die pretty quickly as well. If we consumed, I think, 5 liters straight or something even less, you're gonna die right away. Um, or at least you're gonna have medical problems.
Yeah.
The same thing with psychedelics. If you approach them with respect, if you use them for the tools that they are, they could be very positive. They could be very, very helpful in life and in your development. If you abuse them, on the other hand, they could do some serious damage, I believe. Um, I, I, I'm really not, sure as to whether they could do long-term damage to a person in case the person is that's in case the person is completely stable and sane and doesn't have any history in their family of mental illnesses, schizophrenia, etc. Personally don't know of any people who have stayed in the trip forever, who have gone mad after that, who have done any harm to themselves or to their families or to anyone after that, even when they abused it. I just know of many, many stories of people who abused it and just went through a bag of negative, experience during the trip. Many people end up calling the police or calling the ambulance or doing something really stupid like driving their car, get into a car crash, or I know of people who actually took acid and mushrooms together and went to their office job, and it didn't turn out all right. It really didn't turn out all right.
Obviously.
I think it's inevitable, especially with what we have going on in the world right now. People being scared, people being insecure,
Depressed.
afraid about reality. People's realities are being shattered right now. People need a new
Perspective.
perspective, need a new kick, to kickstart themselves into the new world. So psychedelics are definitely going to grow in popularity. When I gave my first TEDx lecture 6 years ago, I felt like a rebel. I felt like I was doing something very much borderline illegal. And today, I get stopped in the street. I get called by people like yourself every day asking stuff about psychedelics. I can talk about it with anyone now. So that's a huge shift in just 6 years, and it's already been picked up by the legislature as well in the Western world, and it's an inevitability. It's going to come through, definitely.
Perfect, perfect. I guess that's the end. And thank you so much, Simeon. It was a very informative session with you. I mean, I think there's a lot of myths attached with psychedelic drugs that really needed to be broken down, and you really told us facts as it is. Like it was a very neutral and very the pros and cons side of it. You presented both of us. So thank you
Yeah,
so much, and I hope that I've been able to finish it within the time. I know that you had a
yeah.
call. So yes, thank you so much.
It's
And I
absolutely fine. It's fine. Yeah,
yeah,
it was lovely. It was amazing speaking to you, Natasha. Thank you so much
likewise.
for reaching out to me. Thank you for doing what you do. It's important to spread the word, to share the message, and I hope that very many people will benefit from our conversation here. I hope that I was able to give you the right information, and yeah, I wish everyone safe journey.
Yes, safe trip. Yes,
Have a safe trip.
have a
Have a
safe
safe
trip.
trip.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much,
Thank you so much.
Natasha.
See you soon. Thanks.
All the
Bye.
best.
Take
All the
care.
best. Bye.